Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Galactic Conservation Station hung in the darkness like a misplaced Christmas ornament, all gleaming metal and blinking lights, orbiting a gas giant that nobody had bothered to name because, frankly, who cares about gas giants when you're trying to keep apex predators from eating each other, or worse, the staff? Inside Observation Deck 9, Commander Rilmosh was having what humans would call a really bad day. Though his species didn't technically have days, operating on a 36-hour cycle that made scheduling meetings an absolute nightmare. His chitinous exoskeleton clicked rhythmically as he paced, a nervous habit that drove his colleagues insane, while his compound eyes tracked the data, scrolling across multiple holographic displays. "This is unacceptable," he announced to nobody in particular, which was his way of announcing things to everybody in general. "The Gormal juveniles are deteriorating. Again." Dr. Fenlir, who was blessed, or cursed, depending on your perspective, with 4 eyes that could process information from multiple screens simultaneously, didn't bother looking up from his research terminal. "Commander, with all due respect, which you know means I'm about to disagree with you, I'm aware of what that phrase means, Doctor. We've followed every protocol in the Galactic Conservation Codex. Twice. The cubs have optimal nutrition, climate-controlled habitat parameters that match their homeworld within 0.03% accuracy, enrichment activities designed by the finest behavioral specialists in 9 sectors, and yet—" He gestured with 2 of his 4 arms at the live feed from the Gormal enclosure. "Look at them!" Rilmosh looked. He wished he hadn't. The 3 Gormal cubs, each roughly the size of an earth lion, if earth lions had 6 legs, crystalline bone ridges along their spines, and jaws that could crack titanium alloy, were sprawled across their habitat like discarded toys. One was gnawing half-heartedly on an enrichment puzzle that was supposed to stimulate hunting instincts. Another was simply staring at the wall. The third hadn't moved in 3 hours. "They're supposed to be apex predators," Rilmosh muttered. "Category 9 danger classification. Their species once hunted prey across tectonic rifts during planetary shifts. For the love of—" "They're babies," came a voice from the doorway. "Deadly babies, sure, but still babies. And they're bored out of their terrifying little minds." Both aliens turned to face the newest addition to their conversation, and Rilmosh felt his auxiliary breathing spiracles constrict. Another nervous habit, and a rather inconvenient one when one needed oxygen to, live. Rachel stood in the doorway with that particularly human expression that Rilmosh had learned to identify as amused by your suffering. She was compact by human standards, which still made her alarmingly large by most civilized species metrics, with dark hair, pulled back in what she called a practical ponytail, and what Rilmosh privately thought of as a convenient handle for any predator with grabbing appendages. She was also, inconveniently, the station's only Deathworlder staff member, a fact that had caused no less than 16 formal complaints, 32 informal protests, and 1 incident where a Quellian diplomat had fainted upon learning a human was working with Category 8 and above predators. "Miss Rachel," Rilmosh began, using the human honorific he'd painstakingly learned, "this is a closed session." "It's just Rachel, Commander. We've been over this. And closed session or not, I can hear you clicking from 3 corridors away. Your anxiety tells are louder than our PA system." She moved into the observation deck with that fluid, efficient movement that always made Rilmosh's fight-or-flight instincts fire simultaneously. Humans moved like predators, probably because they were predators, a fact that the rest of the galaxy had tried very hard to politely ignore when accepting them into civilized space. Dr. Fenlier, who had considerably less survival instinct and considerably more scientific curiosity, perked up. "You believe the cubs are understimulated?" "I believe," Rachel said, stopping at the observation window and crossing her arms, a gesture that every species recognized as, "I'm about to say something you won't like, that you've all been treating them like they're dangerous because they're predators, when you should be treating them like they're dying because they're not being allowed to be predators." Silence filled the observation deck like water filling a compromised hull. "That's," Rilmosh started. "Insane?" Rachel offered helpfully. "I was going to say, against protocol." "Same thing on this station, apparently." She turned to face them fully, and there was something in her expression that made Rilmosh's species' ancient prey instincts scream. Not aggression, exactly. Determination, which was somehow worse. "Look, I've been watching those cubs for 3 weeks. I've read every report, every behavioral assessment, every nutritional analysis. You know what's missing from all of it? Proper deference to established safety procedures," Rilmosh suggested weakly. Rachel smiled. It wasn't a comforting expression. Challenge. Risk. The fundamental experiences that develop a predator's cognitive architecture. You've made their environment so safe, so controlled, so perfectly optimized that you've removed the one thing they actually need: the chance to think. Dr. Fenlier's 4 eyes widened in something approaching understanding. "You're suggesting their intelligence is atrophying due to lack of environmental pressure." "I'm suggesting," Rachel corrected, "that you're raising the galaxy's most dangerous predators in what amounts to a padded cell, and then acting surprised when they check out mentally. Their instincts are screaming at them to hunt, to problem solve, to overcome challenges. Instead, you're feeding them nutrient paste and showing them holographic prey that they know, instinctively know, isn't real." "The hunting drones are state-of-the-art," Rilmosh began. "The hunting drones are predictable. They follow programmed patterns. The cubs figured out the algorithms in 3 days and lost interest in 4. Rachel moved closer to the observation window, studying the listless cubs below. "On their homeworld, survival isn't guaranteed. Every meal is earned. Every day is a test. You've removed all the tests and wonder why they're failing. Their homeworld," Rilmosh said stiffly, "is a Category 9 death planet, where the atmospheric pressure alone would crush most civilized species, and where the local ecosystem considers everything, including rocks, to be potential prey. We cannot and will not recreate those conditions on a conservation station." "I'm not asking you to." Rachel turned back to face them, and now there was something else in her expression. Something Rilmosh had seen before, usually right before humans did something that made sense in retrospect, and seemed utterly deranged in the moment. "I'm asking you to let me try something different." "Absolutely not," Rilmosh said immediately, his clicking intensifying to what his meditation instructor would definitely call counterproductive levels. "You haven't even heard what I'm proposing." "I don't need to hear it. I can see it in your body language. Whatever you're planning involves entering that enclosure, doesn't it?" Rachel's silence was answer enough. "No," Rilmosh repeated. "Absolutely not. Categorically not. In no possible configuration of space-time is that acceptable. Those cubs may be juveniles, but they're still classified as extreme threat level. Their bite force exceeds 12,000 pounds per square inch, I know. I read the same files you did." Rachel's voice was calm, which was somehow more alarming than if she'd been arguing. Humans arguing made sense. Humans being calm while proposing insanity was, well, it was very human, actually. Commander, those cubs are dying. Not physically, not yet, but mentally. Another 2 weeks of this, and their neural plasticity will begin permanent degradation. You'll have 3 apex predators with the problem-solving capability of furniture. Better furniture than corpses, Rilmosh snapped, which is what they'll be when they inevitably attack you, assuming there's enough left of you afterward to file the incident report about. They won't attack me. You cannot possibly guarantee that. No, Rachel agreed. I can't. But I can guarantee that if you don't let me try, you'll have to choose between permanently sedating 3 of the galaxy's rarest predators or sending them back to their homeworld where, as orphans without pack structure, they'll be dead inside a planetary rotation. That landed like a meteorite. Dr. Fenrir, who had been watching this, exchanged like a spectator at a tennis match. If tennis matches involved the potential death of one player and the complete revision of xenobiological protocols for the other, cleared his throat. What, specifically, are you proposing, Rachel? She took a breath. Give me 1 rotation cycle. Let me enter the enclosure with supplies I choose under my own protocols. If I can't show measurable improvement in the cub's engagement and cognitive function, I'll submit my resignation and personally recommend permanent sedation. And if you get killed, Rilmosh demanded, then you'll have 1 less Deathworlder on staff and a really interesting case study for your safety review board. She said it lightly, but there was steel underneath. Commander, I'm not asking permission to pet them or play games. I'm asking permission to do what humans have done for thousands of generations. Take something dangerous and teach it to be more than dangerous, to be intelligent. That's... Rilmosh struggled for words. That's not how predator rehabilitation works. It's not how your species does predator rehabilitation, Rachel corrected. It's exactly how mine does it. We domesticated wolves while we were still living in caves, Commander. We turned apex predators into partners because we understood something the rest of the galaxy apparently doesn't. Intelligence isn't about removing challenge. It's about teaching something to meet challenges. The observation deck fell silent except for the soft hum of life support and Rilmosh's increasingly frantic clicking. Dr. Fenrir broke the silence. I want to observe. What? Rilmosh's antennae quivered in what might have been apoplexy. If Rachel is correct, and her species' historical record with dangerous fauna is admittedly impressive in a terrifying sort of way, this could revolutionize our understanding of predator cognition. I want full sensor access and the right to document everything. His 4 eyes gleamed with scientific fervor that Rilmosh recognized as the prelude to terrible decisions made in the name of research. You want to watch her get mauled for science? I want to watch her prove that our current protocols are fundamentally flawed for Deathworld species. Or, Fenrir admitted, watch her prove they're correct through catastrophic practical demonstration. Either way, we learn something. Rilmosh looked between them, the human with her unsettling calm, the researcher with his academic enthusiasm, and realized he was outmaneuvered. Worse, they were probably right. The cubs were deteriorating. Standard protocols weren't working. And if there was one thing the galaxy had learned about humans, it was that their insane plans had an annoying habit of succeeding. 1 rotation cycle, he finally said, and immediately regretted it. You get 1 rotation cycle, full sensor monitoring, emergency extraction team on standby, and if those cubs so much as look at you wrong, you'll say, I told you. So at my memorial service. I get it. Rachel's smile was back, and it was somehow both reassuring and absolutely not reassuring at all. When can I start? Rilmosh checked the chronometer and felt his species equivalent of a headache forming behind his optical clusters. Prep time will take 2 hours. You start at next shift rotation. He pointed one of his limbs at her with as much authority as he could muster. And Rachel, I'm holding you to that resignation promise. Fair enough, Commander. She headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and you might want to alert medical that they should review human physiology files, just in case. She left before Rilmosh could ask whether that was for her benefit or theirs. Dr. Fenlir moved to his research terminal, already pulling up recording parameters. This is either going to be the greatest breakthrough in xenobiology since first contact, or the shortest employment period in station history. I'm aware, Rilmosh muttered, watching the cubs on the monitor. One had finally moved, shifting position to stare at a different section of wall. I'm painfully aware. Below, in their pristine, perfectly safe, utterly boring enclosure, 3 of the galaxy's most dangerous predators continued their slow slide into cognitive oblivion, completely unaware that a Deathworlder was about to teach them something their own instincts had forgotten: how to want something badly enough to become dangerous again. 2 hours turned into 2 hours and 30 minutes because, as Rachel patiently explained to an increasingly agitated Commander Rilmosh, humans had specific requirements when entering apex predator enclosures that weren't covered in standard station equipment manifests. Why? Rilmosh demanded, watching her sort through what looked like a collection of garbage. Do you need rocks? Flint, specifically. See the crystalline structure? Rachel held up 2 stones that, to Rilmosh's educated opinion, looked identical to every other rock in the galaxy. I need materials that can create sparks through percussion. Sparks, Rilmosh repeated flatly. Sparks, Rachel confirmed cheerfully. Dr. Fenlir, who had spent the intervening time setting up enough monitoring equipment to track a small planetary invasion, looked up with interest. You're planning to demonstrate tool use? Something like that. Rachel packed the stones into a worn canvas bag, along with dried vegetation she'd requisitioned from the station's botanical section, several pieces of wood in varying sizes, and what appeared to be a bundle of dried grass. How's the monitoring setup? Comprehensive. Fenlir gestured to his array of screens with obvious pride. Thermal imaging, behavioral analysis algorithms, stress hormone detection in both you and the cubs, neural activity scanning, though the cubs' cranial ridges make that less precise, and full audiovisual recording from 16 angles. Planning to sell tickets? Rachel asked. Dryly. Planning to publish if you survive, Fenlir replied with equal dryness. This is either revolutionary science or a very elaborate cautionary tale. Either way, it's publication-worthy. Your optimism is touching, Doctor. I'm a realist. He adjusted one of his monitors. The cubs are currently in the western section of their enclosure, all 3 exhibiting the same lethargic behavior patterns we've documented for the past 18 days. Heart rates are depressed, neural activity is minimal, and they're waiting to die, Rachel interrupted quietly. That's what you're describing. They've given up. The observation deck fell silent. Well then, Rilmosh said after a moment, his clicking notably absent for once. I suppose you'd better go teach them not to. Rachel shouldered her bag and moved toward the enclosure access corridor. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. For what it's worth, Commander. I appreciate you letting me try this. For what it's worth, Rachel. I think you're completely insane. But there was something in Rilmosh's tone that might have been respect or resignation, possibly both. Try not to prove me right about the insane part while disproving me about the letting you try part. I'll do my best. She keyed in her access code and stepped through the airlock-style entry system that separated civilized space from the habitat of things that considered civilized space to be a menu. The moment the inner door sealed behind her, Rilmosh's clicking resumed at double tempo. Neural activity in the cubs just spiked, Dr. Fenlier reported, his eyes tracking data across multiple screens. They've detected the door mechanism. All three are now alert and oriented toward the entry point. On the primary monitor, Rachel stood in the habitat's entrance chamber, completely still. The environmental controls had recreated the Gormal homeworld's atmosphere, thicker than Earth standard, with a reddish tint from the different light spectrum. The temperature sat at what most species would consider uncomfortably warm. The habitat itself was built to scale. Rocky outcroppings, sparse vegetation that looked more like mineral deposits than plants, and enough vertical variation to satisfy a species that hunted across three-dimensional terrain. And in the western section, 3 sets of crystalline-ridged predators had just realized their enclosure had been invaded. "She's not moving," Rilmosh observed, his clicking momentarily interrupted by fascination. "She's letting them come to her," Fenlier murmured. "Most species either flee or assert dominance when entering predator territory. She's doing neither." Rachel stood like a statue, her breathing slow and even, visible on the biometric monitors, while 60 feet away, 3 juvenile Gormal cubs began their approach. They didn't charge. That was the first surprise. They moved like water, 6 legs each propelling them in that disturbing fluid motion that made Gormal such effective hunters. They split instinctively into a flanking pattern, one approaching directly, the other 2 circling to cut off retreat. Textbook pack predator behavior, performed by creatures whose previous handlers had described as minimally responsive. "Heart rate elevated but controlled," Fenlier narrated, watching Rachel's biometrics. "Adrenaline present but not spiking. Respiratory rate, she's deliberately controlling her breathing. Fascinating." The cubs closed to 30 feet. 20. 15. Rachel still didn't move. "What is she doing?" Rilmosh demanded. "Being boring," Fenlier breathed. "Oh, that's clever. That's very clever." "Explain clever before I have to explain to Station Command why we let a human get dismembered." Prey runs or fights. Predators expect one of those responses. She's providing neither. To their sensory processing, she's reading as wrong, confusing, not prey, not threat, just an object. The lead cub reached Rachel's position, 10 feet away, close enough that its breath, visible in the thermal imaging as puffs of warm air, would have touched her. Its head lowered, nostrils flaring, processing scent information. Rachel's eyes tracked its movement. The monitors caught that, but her body remained statue still. The cub huffed, a sound somewhere between curiosity and frustration. When Rachel didn't react, it circled, giving her space, and padded past to investigate the bag she'd set down. She's treating them like background scenery, Rilmosh realized. And they don't know how to process it, Fenlier confirmed. Their hunting instincts are triggered by movement, fear responses, aggression. She's giving them nothing to work with. The second and third cubs joined the first, all 3 now focused on the mysterious bag rather than the mysterious human. One reached out with a paw, each toe tipped with claws that could render steel, and batted at the canvas. That's when Rachel moved. Not toward them. not away. She simply walked past the cubs as if they were furniture, collected her bag, and moved to a clear section of the habitat near one of the rocky outcroppings. The cubs froze, watching her. Neural activity spiking across all 3 cubs, Fenrir reported. They're confused, genuinely confused. Rachel sat down cross-legged, a posture that Rilmosh recognized as remarkably vulnerable for a species that wasn't apex on most worlds, and began unpacking her supplies. She laid out the stones, the dried vegetation, the wood pieces, arranging them with methodical precision. The cubs, moving as one, approached and sat in a rough semicircle about 8 feet away, watching. Did they just, Rilmosh started, exhibit voluntary proximity without aggression? Fenrir finished. Yes, they did. Rachel selected the 2 flint stones. She arranged a small nest of the dried grass and vegetation. Then, with movements that were both practiced and deliberate, she began striking the stones together. The first strike produced nothing. The second created a single spark that died instantly. The third, crack. A bright spark arced from the stones into the tinder nest. All 3 cubs jumped backward, their crystalline ridges flaring in what the behavioral database tagged as a threat response. But they didn't flee. They didn't attack. They stared. "Oh my," Fenrir whispered. "She's showing them fire." Rachel struck again. More sparks. She leaned close to the tinder, breathing gently on the ember that was starting to form. The cubs crept forward, lowering their bodies to the ground, heads extended, eyes fixed on the growing point of light. "Most species," Rilmosh heard himself saying, "have an instinctive fear of fire." "Most species," Fenrir countered, "don't come from worlds where fire is a survival tool rather than a natural disaster." A tiny flame caught, smaller than Rilmosh's smallest digit, but unmistakably fire. The cubs vocalized, not the aggressive growls from their threat assessment files, but high-pitched chirps, curiosity sounds. The database had no prior recordings of juvenile Gormal making curiosity sounds because, as their handlers had sadly noted, the cubs had stopped being curious about anything. Rachel fed the flame with small pieces of dried vegetation, building it gradually. She narrated as she worked, her voice carrying through the monitoring equipment. "Oxygen feeds it. Too much fuel smothers it. You have to find the balance." "She's teaching them," Rilmosh said numbly. "She's demonstrating cause and effect," Fenrir corrected, all 4 eyes locked on different monitors. "Watch their neural patterns. Synaptic activity is increasing. They're thinking again." The flame grew to the size of a hand. Rachel carefully placed small sticks around it in a structure that allowed airflow while containing the burn. The cubs shuffled closer, their earlier caution replaced by fascination. One cub, the largest of the 3, extended its head toward the flames. "No, no, no," Rilmosh muttered. Rachel's hand moved, not fast enough to startle, but fast enough to intercept. She placed her palm in front of the cub's snout, blocking its approach. "Too close," she said gently. "Burns." The cub pulled back, looked at Rachel, looked at the fire, then settled at what Rachel apparently considered a safe distance. "Did that just—" Rilmosh couldn't finish the sentence. "Understand and obey a safety instruction," Fenrir completed. "Without prior training, without conditioning, just comprehension and compliance." Rachel added larger pieces of wood now, building the fire to a sustainable level. The flames danced, casting flickering light across the habitat's red-tinted atmosphere. The cubs sat in their semicircle, utterly mesmerized, their earlier lethargy completely absent. "Biometric analysis," Fenrir reported, his voice distant with concentration. Cortisol levels dropping in all three cubs, dopamine increasing, neural plasticity markers showing activity we haven't seen since their arrival. They're engaged, mentally stimulated. For the first time in weeks, their brains are functioning at species-appropriate levels. Rachel reached into her bag and produced something that made Rilmosh's breathing spiracles clench again. A piece of raw meat from the cubs' standard rations. She speared it on a stick and held it over the flames. "Oh, this should be interesting," Fenrir murmured. The cubs' nostrils flared, their heads tilted in unison, that eerie synchronization that pack predators displayed. They'd eaten that same meat raw for weeks and barely touched it recently. Now, watching it transform over the fire, they were riveted. The meat sizzled. The smell, captured and analyzed by the habitat's sensors, changed as proteins broke down and reformed under heat. The cubs went absolutely still. Rachel waited until the meat was cooked, not burned, but properly seared, then removed it from the fire. She let it cool for a moment, then tore off a piece and tossed it to the nearest cub. The juvenile caught it mid-air, reflexes still sharp, Rilmosh noted, and bit down. Its reaction was immediate. The cub's eyes widened, its ridges flared, and it made a sound that the database helpfully labeled as extreme positive stimulus response. The other two cubs immediately crowded closer, vocalizing demands. Rachel smiled, that particular human expression that showed teeth but somehow didn't mean aggression, and tossed pieces to the other two. The response was identical. 3 apex predators, bred by evolution to kill efficiently and without mercy, reduced to excited juveniles by the simple act of cooking their food. "She just blew their minds with basic chemistry," Fenrir said, sounding like he was somewhere between laughing and crying. "They've never experienced cooked meat. The texture change, the flavor transformation, the way heat breaks down the proteins, it's completely novel to their sensory processing." "More than that," Rilmosh added quietly, watching the cubs crowd around Rachel as she prepared more meat. "She's shown them that their environment can be manipulated, that reality isn't fixed." On screen, Rachel continued her lesson, showing the cubs how to maintain the fire, demonstrating safe distances, using stones to create barriers. The cubs watched every movement, their earlier pack hunting coordination now redirected toward learning. "How long has it been?" Rilmosh asked. Fenrir checked the chronometer. 93 minutes. "In 93 minutes, she's accomplished more than our entire behavioral team managed in 3 weeks. In 93 minutes, Fenrir corrected, she's proven that we've been approaching Deathworld species rehabilitation completely wrong. We've been trying to make them safe. She's teaching them to be smart." In the habitat, Rachel added another log to the fire, and 3 pairs of crystalline ridged eyes followed the movement with absolute attention. Not as prey watching a threat, not as predators stalking food, as students watching a teacher. And somewhere in the back of Rilmosh's mind, a thought crystallized that would haunt him for the rest of his career. This was why humans were terrifying. Not because they were strong or vicious, or even particularly hardy by Deathworld standards, but because they could take the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy and make those creatures want to learn from them. The next 8 rotations transformed the Gormal habitat from a sterile holding pen into something that resembled a very strange classroom. If classrooms featured 3 increasingly enthusiastic apex predators and a human who apparently had a death wish that kept proving itself wrong, Commander Rilmosh had stopped clicking somewhere around rotation 4, Dr. Fenler had stopped sleeping somewhere around rotation 2, and Rachel had stopped being the station's controversial Deathworlder hire and become something far more dangerous. She'd become interesting. Lateral problem-solving test results, Fenler announced, his 4 eyes bloodshot from lack of rest, but gleaming with scientific fervor. The Cubs' cognitive performance has increased by 218%. 218. That's not possible, Rilmosh said automatically. That's what I said when I ran the first analysis. Then I ran it again, and 12 more times after that. Fenler pulled up neural imaging that looked like abstract art painted by someone on stimulants. Their synaptic formation has accelerated beyond anything in the xenobiological literature. They're forming new neural pathways at a rate consistent with critical developmental periods, except they're past that developmental window. This shouldn't be happening. On the primary monitor, Rachel sat by her fire, which the Cubs now understood how to maintain without her constant supervision, while the 3 juveniles engaged in what could only be described as play. Except it wasn't just play. They were testing things. One cub carefully moved a rock closer to the fire, watched how the heat affected the stone, then moved it back. Scientific method, performed by a creature whose species the galaxy had classified as instinct-driven. Another cub had discovered that certain dried plants produced different colored smoke when burned. It was systematically testing the vegetation, watching the results with focused intensity. The third was attempting to recreate Rachel's fire-starting technique with 2 stones. It lacked the manual dexterity and the correct stones, but the fact that it was trying spoke volumes about cognitive development that shouldn't be possible. She's not training them, Rilmosh said slowly, watching the screen. She's not conditioning them or programming responses. No, Fenler agreed. She's doing something much more fundamental. She's teaching them that the universe has rules they can learn and manipulate. He pulled up another data stream. Watch this recording from yesterday. The playback showed Rachel placing a piece of meat equidistant from all 3 cubs. Standard resource competition test. Most predator species would fight for it or establish dominance hierarchy through aggression. The cubs looked at the meat, looked at each other. Then the smallest cub picked it up, carried it to the fire, and began the process Rachel had taught them for cooking. The other 2 waited patiently. When the meat was cooked, the small cub divided it into 3 portions. Cooperative resource sharing, Fenler narrated unnecessarily, in a species that, in the wild, exhibits violent competition for food. They've extrapolated from Rachel's teachings that cooperation around fire produces better outcomes than competition. That's... Rilmosh searched for words. That's not instinct. That's intelligence. Fenler's voice carried something like awe. Pure, problem-solving, cause and effect understanding intelligence. She hasn't suppressed their predator instincts. She's given them the cognitive tools to direct those instincts productively. A message alert chimed. Rilmosh opened it and felt his spiracles constrict again. Station director wants a full briefing. The Cubs' behavioral transformation has been noticed by the Oversight Committee. They're sending a review team. When? They're already en route. Arrival in 6 rotations. Both of them looked at the monitor, where Rachel was currently demonstrating to the Cubs how different materials burned at different rates. The juveniles watched with the focus of university students taking notes. This is going to change everything, Fenler said quietly. Every protocol we have for Deathworld species rehabilitation. Every assumption about predator cognition. Every safety procedure based on the premise that dangerous species need to be controlled rather than educated. Will have to be rewritten, Rilmosh finished. by someone who understands what we're watching. They both knew who that someone was. Rotation 10 brought what Rachel privately termed the philosophy lecture, though it wasn't planned as such. She sat by the fire. The cubs had learned to build it themselves now, though they still liked her supervision, and addressed them as if they could understand every word. The monitoring equipment captured it all. Fire isn't just heat and light, she told the three attentive faces. Fire is possibility. It's the moment your species stops reacting to the world and starts shaping it. She added a log, demonstrating the proper placement for optimal airflow. My species figured that out about 1 million years ago. We weren't the strongest, weren't the fastest, had laughable natural weapons compared to the things hunting us. The cubs watched her hands move, tracked the fire's response. But we had fire, and fire meant we could see in the dark, stay warm in the cold, cook food that would otherwise make us sick, scare away the predators that thought we were easy prey. She smiled at them. Fire was the first technology that turned prey into something else, something new. In the observation deck, Rilmosh listened and felt understanding crystallize with uncomfortable clarity. She's not just teaching them survival skills, he said. No, Fenrir agreed. She's teaching them what her species learned, that intelligence plus tools equals dominance, that you don't have to be born apex, you can become apex. That's what Deathworlder dominance actually means, Rilmosh continued, the pieces falling into place. It's not about being from a dangerous world, it's about taking danger and transforming it into advantage. On screen, one of the cubs made a sound, a complex vocalization that the translation algorithms struggled with. Rachel responded with a series of sounds that mimicked the cub's patterns. The juvenile's ridges flared, with what could only be pleasure at being understood. She's working on communication, Fenrir noted, teaching them that information transfer is another form of power. The hunting drone test came on rotation 12. The drones, which the cubs had ignored for weeks, were reintroduced to the habitat. Standard protocol dictated they'd be used to assess predatory response. What happened instead became the most watched footage in station history. The cubs didn't just hunt the drones, they strategized. One cub created a distraction using a burning branch, fire as a tool, not just a comfort. Another flanked while the distraction was active. The third waited in ambush position, having calculated where the drone would flee. The drone was disabled in 43 seconds. Then the cubs did something that made the entire observation deck fall silent. They brought the disabled drone to Rachel, dropped it at her feet, and looked at her expectantly. They want approval, Fenrir whispered. They're not just hunting, they're demonstrating competence to their teacher. Rachel examined the drone, pointed out how their teamwork had been effective, then suggested alternative approaches they might try. The cubs listened, processing, learning. This is insane, Rilmosh said, but there was no heat in it. This is absolutely, completely insane. This is human, Fenrir corrected. This is what they did with wolves, with horses, with every dangerous species they encountered. They didn't dominate through force. They uplifted through education. They made partners out of predators. By giving them something more valuable than dominance, Rilmosh realized, knowledge, options, the ability to be more than their instincts. On the monitor, Rachel was teaching the cubs how to use rocks as tools, demonstrating percussion and leverage. 3 apex predators from a Category 9 death world sat like students, absorbing information that would make them more dangerous than nature had designed them to be. And somehow, impossibly, that made them safer. Because danger with intelligence was danger with choice, and choice meant they could choose cooperation over aggression. Rilmosh watched Rachel laugh as one cub successfully cracked open a sealed container using the technique she'd taught. The juvenile's triumph was evident in every line of its body. "She's not making them less dangerous," he said quietly. "No," Fenrir agreed. "She's making them dangerous and intelligent, which is far more terrifying." He paused. "And far more beautiful." In the habitat, 3 cubs and 1 human sat by firelight, and the cubs learned that the universe was theirs to shape if they were clever enough to understand it. And in the observation deck, 2 aliens watched and understood. Finally, what it meant when humans looked at something deadly and saw not a threat to control, but a mind to educate. That was the real dominance, not conquest, uplift. The containment breach alarm sounded at rotation 15, 3 hours before the Oversight Committee's scheduled arrival, because the universe had a sense of timing that was either perfect or terrible, depending on your perspective. "Craxelon loose in Section 9, the automated system announced with the sort of calm that made Rilmosh want to dismantle something. "All personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. Security teams respond." "Section 9, Fenrir said, his 4 eyes going wide. "That's adjacent to the Gormal habitat," Rilmosh finished, already moving. "How did a Craxelon get out?" "Does it matter right now?" Fenrir was pulling up schematics, tracking the massive predator's movement through the station's sensor grid. "It's heading directly toward the habitat junction. If it breaches—" They both knew what happened when a fully mature Craxelon encountered juvenile competitors. The species was notorious for killing the young of rival predators. 3 cubs wouldn't stand a chance. "Rachel," Rilmosh activated the habitat comm. "You need to evacuate now." Her voice came back infuriatingly calm. "Not without the cubs. The emergency extraction won't support their mass." "Then I'm staying. Rachel, a Craxelon will kill you and them. You have approximately 3 minutes before—" The sound of tearing metal cut him off. On the monitor, the habitat's northern wall buckled inward as something massive hit it from the other side. 2 minutes, Fenrir corrected weakly. In the habitat, Rachel moved fast. She grabbed several pieces of wood from her supply pile and began rebuilding the fire larger, faster. The cubs sensed the change in her demeanor immediately. Their ridges flared, their postures shifted to alert status. The wall buckled again. A section gave way. The Craxelon pushed through, 3 times the cub's size, covered in plates of natural armor, with mandibles that could crush titanium. It saw the cubs and roared, a sound that registered on seismic sensors 2 decks away. The cubs didn't run. They moved into a formation Rachel hadn't taught them, but one that incorporated everything she had taught them. 1 cub circled left. Another took the right flank. The third positioned itself directly between Rachel and the intruder. "They're protecting her," Fenrir breathed. But it was more than that. The flanking cubs weren't just circling. They were herding, using the habitat's rocky outcroppings as barriers, forcing the Craxelon into narrower space. Pack tactics enhanced by spatial reasoning. The Craxelon lunged at the nearest cub. The juvenile dodged, not just on instinct, but with calculated timing, moving just enough to avoid contact while maintaining formation. "They're thinking 3 moves ahead," Rilmosh said, watching the tactical display. "That's not instinct. That's strategy." The cubs held their own, but they were outmatched. The Craxelon's armor meant their claws couldn't penetrate. Their size disadvantage was too great for sustained combat. Rachel made her move. She grabbed 2 of the longer branches from her pile. both already burning, and moved toward the fire. In seconds, she had a wall of flame between the Craxalon and the cubs, feeding it with the remaining wood and dried vegetation. The flames shot upward, bright and hot, and impossible to miss. The Craxalon froze. Fire. Every species had instinctive responses to fire, and those responses usually involved go literally anywhere else. The massive predator backed away from the flames, confused and threatened by something it couldn't bite or crush. It roared again, but the sound carried uncertainty now. The cubs understood immediately. They moved to Rachel's flanks, maintaining their protective formation but letting the fire do the work of deterrence. Security arrived 60 seconds later to find the Craxalon contained by nothing more than burning wood and one human's understanding of universal fear responses. Tranquilizers deployed, the security chief reported. Target sedated. How in the name of fire, Rilmosh said simply. She used fire. Against a Category 10 predator? Technically, she used applied knowledge of predator psychology, enhanced by controlled combustion and 3 highly motivated students. Fenrir was recording everything naturally. But yes, basically, fire. 6 rotations later, Commander Rilmosh stood before the Oversight Committee with Rachel beside him and 3 remarkably well-behaved Gormal cubs visible on the monitor behind them. Your report claims, the committee chair said slowly, that human rehabilitation methods are superior to established protocols. My report claims, Rilmosh corrected, that Deathworld species require Deathworld approaches. You cannot save predators by removing everything that makes them predators. The human taught them to make fire, another committee member objected. That's not rehabilitation. That's education. That's exactly rehabilitation, Rachel interjected. Rehabilitation isn't about making dangerous things docile. It's about making them functional, intelligent, giving them options beyond pure instinct. On the monitor, one cub carefully maintained the fire, while another engaged with a puzzle box. Not the simple ones from before, but something complex that required multiple steps and genuine problem-solving. The third cub was attempting to teach itself to use a basic tool. They're orphans from a death world, Rachel continued. In the wild, they'd learned survival from their pack. Here, they needed to learn something more fundamental. How to think. How to adapt. How to take what they have and transform it into what they need. That's what humans do, Fenrir added. They came from a planet trying to kill them and learned to kill it back. With tools, with fire, with transmitted knowledge. Rachel didn't just save 3 cubs. She demonstrated what Deathworlder dominance actually means. The committee chair was silent for a long moment. And what does it mean, Doctor? It means, Rilmosh answered, surprising himself, that humans don't conquer. They uplift. They take dangerous things and make them partners, not through force, through education, through offering something more valuable than survival, the ability to thrive. The committee chair looked at the monitor where 3 cubs sat by firelight, engaged and intelligent and utterly transformed from the dying creatures they'd been weeks before. This will require complete revision of our protocols. Yes, Rachel agreed, and you'll need to train others in your methods. I can do that. And we'll need to redesign habitats for species that can now manipulate their environments. Probably a good idea, Rachel said, barely suppressing a smile. The chair sighed, a universal expression of resignation. Very well. Protocol revision approved. Congratulations, Rachel. You're now Director of Deathworld Species Rehabilitation. 3 cycles later, Rachel sat by the fire with her cubs, adolescents now, growing into their intelligence faster than their size. She was teaching them basic pattern recognition using stones arranged in sequences. Through the observation window, Rilmosh watched with Fenrir. A dozen other researchers from various species had joined them, all taking notes on the humans' methods. "You know what's really terrifying?" Rilmosh said quietly. "What?" "This isn't unique to her. Every human has this ability. They've been doing this for millennia with every dangerous species they encounter, making partners out of predators." "And that," Fenrir said, watching Rachel laugh as one cub successfully completed the pattern, "is why humans don't need to conquer. They make you want to learn from them." In the habitat, Rachel added wood to the fire, and 3 apex predators leaned closer to watch the flames dance. Students of the Deathworlder way, learning that intelligence and fire could transform anything, even themselves.